Hey, this is the Level Up Engineering Podcast, where we talk with some of the most successful tech leaders who reveal actionable management insights that help you take your developer team to the next level. This episode was brought to you by Coding Sans, a software development agency building web applications with Angular and Node.js. Check them out at codingsans.com.
I am Carolina Toth, and this is the Level Up Engineering Podcast. Today, my guest is Jerie Shaw, Senior R&D Education Program Developer at Shopify. If you are our listener, you are familiar with Shopify because we talked to Farhan Savar, VP of Engineering, before. If you haven't heard that episode, go back to episode number 27 to check it out. Jerie here designs educational programs for Shopify folk in R&D, including developers, designers, and data scientists. So she's right up in our alley, as our listeners are usually leaders of the tech industry. Welcome to the show, Jerie.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here.
We are glad to have you. Please, let's start out by you telling us a bit about yourself.
Well, I'm Jerie, as you mentioned. I've worked at Shopify for about just coming up on 5 years now, which is wild. And I've always sort of been fascinated about the world of education and especially technical training, because I think that it's a really challenging and fun problem to try to solve, is how to make really exceptional technical training for folks. And Shopify is one of the greatest places in the world to work. So it's really wonderful working with people who are so engaged and brilliant. It really makes my job an absolute joy.
How awesome. Honestly, it's great to hear about such workplaces. So today our topic is technical onboarding, which was actually inspired by a series of tweets where you shared some insights about the new global onboarding program that you designed. So let's just start out by saying what constitutes technical onboarding so we can all be on the same page.
Yeah, that's a great question. So what we talk about when we're talking about technical onboarding at Shopify is our onboarding program for everybody in a technical role. So that's anybody in data, development, UX, or product. And so I really think of the technical onboarding program as quite a holistic thing, including right from day one, getting your laptop set up, to much more in-depth, complex boot camps and workshops on technical topics like Rails or React Native, for example. But it's for new employees at Shopify.
All right. So given the situation, we started having this global pandemic in April of 2020. How do you do technical onboarding differently when you are working remotely?
Yeah, very differently. I think a lot of folks, when we first started working from home, a lot of education professionals thought, let's just take what we used to do and offer it over Zoom. And I think very quickly, a lot of us realized that, hey, that doesn't really work. I think in some ways, remote is sort of a gift because it's a forcing function for really quality in educational design, because you can't take anything for granted. There's nothing to hide behind. You really have to be deliberate and intentional about everything. You can't rely on people being excited to just be in a room together away from their desks, for example, which I think was a pretty big factor in why people liked a lot of our training before, So I'll take one example of how we design differently for remote. And it's based on this idea of engagement and energy. So when you onboard in person as a facilitator, you become really good at managing the energy in the room. And I think people feed off of each other to become energized and engaged. But in remote onboarding, you have to be incredibly intentional about how you structure people's time and how you use people's time to make sure that you keep that energy and engagement up. So we know that people are really energized by problem solving together. We know that people are really de-energized by spending an entire day on a video call. So what we essentially did to solve for this is we designed all of our technical onboarding experiences. We redesigned them to be active and synchronous, but hybrid. So what that means is we give a group of learners a real challenge, like, build a data pipeline or ship a dashboard. And we have them work that problem at the same time together. And then we give them a lot of support structures, like a virtual pod they can drop in on to collaborate with each other, like subject matter experts available in Slack. So they get that sense of like being together with a group and working on a really engaging and interesting problem, but they don't have to be trapped on a video call for 8 hours in a day. And that model is really working well for us. So that's an example of kind of how we've rebuilt our technical onboarding to work for a fully remote environment.
So could we say that the main selling point of the in-person onboarding is really just being together and learning together, and when in remote, it's more so about working together actually?
I think that's an insightful question. I do think the togetherness of learning is underestimated, how important that is. So we're trying to find that happy medium, the way that it works in remote, because I think the initial impulse could be, okay, let's just make everything fully self-directed, alone. And I think that what we're finding is that actually one of our biggest challenges now with folks onboarding remotely is the isolation and the loneliness. And so finding some way that we can have people together, but also not exhaust them, is a really interesting tension.
Right. Just loneliness is just such an awful word. And I am also sitting here at my desk at home by myself, and I can totally feel what you mean. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners also know exactly what you mean. So how can we make remote onboarding less lonely? What can we do to make the new joiners feel like they are part of a group?
It's such a great question. And if any of your listeners have great ideas, I would welcome them to share them with me, because it's still a problem we're grappling with. Some of the things we're trying right now are, like I mentioned, we are really doubling down on synchronous learning experiences, meaning folks learning the same thing at the same time. So that's one way. And we're encouraging a lot of group work and collaboration and pairing and problem solving together. We're also introducing lots of drop-in social opportunities. So we're playing Drawful together online, a couple times a week. Another thing we're trying, which I'm really interested to see how this sort of plays out long term, but another thing we're trying is really deeply involving people's managers and onboarding buddies in the formal onboarding process. So I think typically there was kind of this sense of, somebody starts at a company, they go through their formal onboarding, and then they're sort of handed off to their manager. We're trying to change that relationship to be more of a partnership. So for example, if you join Shopify and you're in data, you're going to work with a cohort of people to build and implement a real data pipeline, which is pretty exciting to do that in a week. And at the end of every day, you have a deliverable that you send to your lead and your onboarding buddy that they're going to review and celebrate with you. So just creating those opportunities for new hires to connect with their leads in a way that's meaningful. We're hoping that has an impact on that feeling of isolation.
Awesome. Now that you mentioned some of the key players in onboarding, could you elaborate a little more about the technical onboarding process at Shopify? Like, who are the buddies? Are they assigned? Are they volunteering? Who are the tech leads? Who are the other people that are involved?
Yeah, in terms of the sort of extended onboarding team, if you will, absolutely the person's manager, the hiring manager, is the most crucial person in this whole process. So they really own the entire onboarding experience for their new hire, including developing an onboarding plan, giving feedback on deliverables, as I mentioned. The lead is the one who selects a buddy. And typically an onboarding buddy will be probably somebody on their team who can support them, especially in the more social aspects of joining a new company. So how do you find fun Slack channels to hang out in? How do you access support that you might need in your role? So that's really the role of an onboarding buddy, is a bit more informal, a bit more of a social role, which is extremely important. And then there's the whole technical training team. So my team that manages the technical onboarding process is 4 people, and we meet and work directly one-on-one with every single new hire in R&D.
Wow. So could you tell us a bit more about the crucial elements of what the process looks like from day 0, I assume, to the final day of onboarding?
Yeah, absolutely. So the technical onboarding program at Shopify is called R&D Discovery. So if you hear me referring to that, I'm talking about the entire program that we've built. And it is a modular, customizable onboarding program for all new hires across R&D, as I've mentioned. The first week is really spent learning sort of Shopify's history and culture and doing some basic laptop setup. And near the end of week 1, all new hires actually ship code for the first time at Shopify. So that's something we're actually really proud about, is that if you start in R&D at Shopify, you're going to ship code by the end of your first week. In week 2, new hires in R&D embed on the support team for a week. As part of that process, they really learn our product deeply. They build their own test store. They, configure shipping settings. They dig into theme code, all the stuff that, would really give them an in-depth, hands-on understanding of our product. And then they actually answer real merchant emails to help merchants deal with challenges they might be having on their online store. So that is week 2. Then in weeks 3 and 4, new hires transition into working through a custom onboarding plan that their manager has built for them and that we have worked with their manager to help build. But essentially what their manager does is select from a bunch of optional learning experiences that my team offers, including boot camps, workshops, and self-directed activities, and constructs those into a plan that their new hire then works on for a couple of weeks, supported by our team. So weeks 3 and 4 look very different depending on what your role is, what your craft is.
And it's a 4-week process?
That's correct. Although it's sort of like a gradual transition away from, so weeks 1 and 2 are very structured, you're 9 to 5 working with a group. As we go into weeks 3 and 4, we sort of start a gradual process of weaning off of like structured learning and workshops towards more problem-based learning, more team-based learning, more project-based learning.
Awesome.
And that learning will continue for, many, many months, certainly. We don't consider someone to be fully onboarded after their first month. It's just that we want to offer that extra level of support within their first month.
Mm-hmm. Do you somehow follow the new hires with your team after they are done with their onboarding process?
Yeah, we absolutely do. I mean, it's the greatest job in the world because you get to meet all these incredible people, and really we become friends with like everyone who starts at Shopify and R&D, which is such a gift. And so our socials, we often invite folks back who have been in the program previously. So it really becomes a lovely, vibrant community of new folks. And we also follow folks a bit more in terms of evaluating our program as well. So one of the metrics that we use to evaluate our program is time to 10th pull request. So a pull request being what developers create when they ship code. We actually measure how long it takes folks to ship their 10th bit of code at Shopify. And that's a measure that we use to determine the impact and effectiveness of our programming.
Wow. Could you elaborate a little bit on that? Like how you measure the success?
It's such a fascinating data science challenge, measuring the impact of onboarding with all the intervening variables and the complexity of real life. So it's something that we certainly haven't solved, but it's something that we're exploring and really having fun exploring. So we have a lot of sort of short-term metrics, of course, that guide a lot of our work. So we ask folks, did this learning opportunity offer good value for time? We ask them about the outcomes that we want them to get from each learning experience and sort of measure our success at that level. But in terms of the long-term measurement, yeah, we're looking at a couple of different ways of exploring that. And this measuring the time it takes to ship code is important to us. We want to get people to the point where they feel confident and comfortable writing and shipping code as quickly as possible, not for any other reason than I think that that's what people want when they started a new company, right? They're excited to contribute. They want to be able to ship code. And so if we can give them the knowledge, the confidence to do that, and we can do that quickly, I think that it makes for a great learner experience as well.
Right. Thank you. You also mentioned in the beginning how when people get the technical onboard experience, they also get like a larger view, is what I heard. So they don't only get in the nitty-gritty of using the technologies, they also join the support staff and work with actual end users. Could you tell us a bit more about why and how that happens?
Absolutely. That was one of the pieces that was the most important to us, I think, and meaningful to us. It is, how do we make sure that folks joining Shopify have the opportunity to really deeply understand what it is that we do and the product that we offer? And so we kind of explored some different options for what that could look like. And what we decided ultimately is like, hey, we already have this group of amazing people at our company who are experts in our product and in our merchants. Why don't we just, put folks in R&D with those people who know this so deeply and so well already? And so we worked with the support team really closely to design this program where essentially a small group of onboarders in R&D will pair with one or two support advisors who are also educators, and they go through a guided program. So essentially the program follows a general structure of you learn about an area of our product, let's say shipping, which can be quite complex. Then you get experience with that area of the product working within a test store. So let's say you build a test store and you go in and you set all kinds of shipping settings. Then you support actual merchants struggling with that part of their store as well. So you learn about the concept, you apply it yourself, and then you help someone else who maybe needs some support in that area. And so all of that is guided and supported by facilitators who are, absolute experts in our platform and in supporting our merchants. So there's often many reviews of drafts of emails that go back and forth before it's approved to go out to the merchants. So it's a really important and a really rewarding aspect of our onboarding, because like the reactions that we see from, let's say, a new developer who gets a message back from a merchant saying like, thank you so much, you helped me so much, like this was so critical to me and my business. I mean, that's the best feeling in the world, right? And they're getting it in week 2 on the job.
Awesome. It sounds like you are also getting a bit of the engagement game on right away when people are allowed to ship code and they get to interact with the end users. It sounds so, I don't know, like heartwarming. How do you integrate technical onboarding in the entire process of onboarding, and how do two differ?
It's a great question, because I think that historically, or I guess typically, onboarding can be quite siloed, right? It's like you do this program and then you're handed off to your team, as we talked about earlier. So certainly one of the things that we wanted to do was make the experience feel seamless. It should be invisible to new hires which team worked on something. I think that it should really feel like one seamless, cohesive experience. So the way we've tried to solve that problem is by working very closely with managers. So we have onboarding plan templates, and those onboarding plan templates don't just include our programming. It's really a holistic plan that covers, their first 3 days, which are run by a team called Startup at Shopify. then through to technical onboarding, which is what my team offers, and then through to, what one-on-ones should you be doing to gather context? What projects are you going to be working on? What are the intricacies of your team and your team's processes? So that onboarding plan that we work on with managers includes all of those components. So the goal is that for a new hire, they just have one plan that feels cohesive. We also built in this transition period that I mentioned where we're actively supporting a sense of community among new hires as they transition onto their team. So it's a bit of a warm handoff, a bit of a supportive handoff, as opposed to just sort of like, okay, you're in onboarding and now you're not. And we found that works really well, actually, having that supported transition period, especially in remote, because as we mentioned, it can feel very, very lonely. And as you start to build this community with your new hires, you don't want to just lose that, right? You want to hold on to those connections and those relationships.
Right. It sounds like, from the bits and pieces of what I've heard, that you paid really close attention to how it feels to get the onboarding experience at Shopify. And I am just so curious. You mentioned in the beginning that there are some gut feelings about making onboarding remote. And I am just so curious, how did you start the entire rebuilding the program?
It was quite the undertaking. I'll tell you that. It was quite the undertaking, and it happened very quickly, which is one of the amazing things about Shopify is there's a lot of incredible people to work with, and damn, do they move quickly. So it's a lot of fun. The way we started, which I think this unlocked a lot for us. The way we started was by going back to the drawing board and asking managers, what are the things that people do in your craft that show you that they're onboarded or that they're impactful? What does it actually look like when somebody has an impact as a web developer or a mobile developer or a data scientist? And we really tried to get managers to share with us not what they thought people should know, but again, what people actually do. So they ship PRs, they review other people's code, they pair regularly. These are some of the things that we heard. They do a dev on-call shift. These are some of the things that we heard. And so for every individual behavior or action that spoke to impact, that was our starting point. And we built activities, workshops, boot camps around those specific things. That actually unlocked a lot for us, as I mentioned, because suddenly we had a really action-oriented onboarding program, a really goal-driven onboarding program. And what that allows a lead to do is to just look at this list of challenges, essentially, like, hey, ship your first PR, do a pairing session for the first time, and just select those challenges for their new hires. And every single one links directly to a self-directed activity, a workshop, a boot camp. And I think that what that allowed us to do, as I mentioned, is build a really active and digital by design onboarding program.
It sounds like you kind of reverse engineered your new onboarding program, but that's awesome. Is there anything that you kind of regret, or now that I know you are still, building the program, because it's always a work of art when you create a process, you have to, retrospective it and then make it better the next time around. But is there anything that you would warn our listeners against, or something that was really a striking, impactful realization for you?
Oh gosh, we've learned so much. It's been such a period of rapid growth and iteration, which has been so much fun. I think one of the pieces we underestimated, which is what we've been talking about a lot already, is the social isolation and the impact of that on new hires. I think, especially if we used to work in office, obviously, now we've transitioned to digital by design, where a majority of people will work from home, sort of permanently. And I think that a lot of hiring managers still are folks who onboarded in an office. And as a result, I think it can be hard to put yourself in the shoes of someone who is new and, might be spending 7 hours at home every day alone, on their computer. Like, they don't have a calendar full of meetings like more tenured folks might have. So I think that that's something we maybe underestimated in our original design, is how important it was to solve that problem. And I've been really encouraged. There's Jordan on my team is incredible. Shout out to Jordan if she listens to this. And I hope she will too. Yeah, she's been designing and experimenting with all kinds of just creative ways to get people connecting, to start forming those social relationships that really impact somebody's entire experience of not just onboarding, but about working at a company. So yeah, shout out to Jordan. And I would say that was our number one learning so far, is not to underestimate the importance of solving for that piece.
All right. With that said, if somebody hasn't made the leap to reorganize or rebuild their onboarding process for the new remote world that we are experiencing, how should they start building a technical onboarding process?
Start with what impact looks like and what you want people to be able to do. I do feel like that framing really opens up your mind to, and sort of is a forcing function to design just a quality educational experience. Because again, it focuses you on active learning. It focuses you on problem-solving learning as opposed to lecture-based learning. So I would say that's where I would start if I were to do this again. I think that worked really well for us. And then I think you can also start small. I mean, when we launched on May 11th, our new program. We launched for one craft only, developers. And because our program is quite modular, we have a variety of optional activities. That design actually gave us the option of just saying, hey, with our first cohort, we're launching 15 optional activities. Leads can pick and choose the ones that are useful. And if none of them are useful yet, that's fine. Like, jump into your role. That's okay. And then each cohort, we've launched something new. Now we have the Rails Bootcamp, this amazing 3-day experience where people build a Rails app. Then we launched, an entire week of data learning that folks can attend. So kind of by breaking it up into a bit more of a modular design, it sort of frees you up to work iteratively and start small, build something, one thing, and then build the second thing, and then the third thing, and then before you know it, you have a digital by design onboarding program.
So to make sure I understand correctly, it kind of sounds like we shouldn't view onboarding as just this one project. It should be more like a series of little projects that at the end one can feel like they've been onboarded. Is that right?
I think that's a great way to think about it. And I think especially with remote, some of the designs that we used to have for onboarding programs aren't necessarily going to be successful. So if your onboarding program right now looks like a week in a room listening to lectures, maybe that worked great for you before. It probably doesn't work great for you right now. And so by actually breaking things up into these modular components, not only does it unlock that great iterative build like we talked about, where you can really start small, I think it also just works better for people because they can pick and choose what works for them. With in-person training, something you get in the box with that design is people are happy to be there together. And so, maybe this 1 hour workshop isn't really super relevant to me, but, I'm excited because I'm here with my friends and I'm away from my desk. You don't get that with remote. If something is not a good use of someone's time and they're sitting at home alone at their computer on camera, that's not going to work. They're not going to have a good experience. And so, by making things a bit more modular, by breaking things up and giving people options, I think that the experience is significantly better.
All right. So would you say the new remote onboarding processes have to be a bit more flexible?
I absolutely think so. Yeah, I do. And I think, again, that's sort of the beauty of remote is like, it is a forcing function to make our craft as educators better. So I do think flexibility is really important. And I think especially if you have a global team and you're working with multiple time zones, that becomes even more crucial. So for almost everything we offer in the program, we have a fully self-directed option and a facilitated option. And we often have facilitated options that kick off in multiple time zones. So that kind of flexibility allows us to really meet the needs of a really global team and also different types of learners. I mean, someone might be in the Eastern time zone where we might offer something facilitated, but depending on their schedule, on their home life, on their learning style, maybe a self-directed option is better for them. And so rather than kind of shut down options, our goal has been, how can we make the most flexible, customizable program, but also have each component be as exceptional as possible?
That sounds like a really big job, but it also sounds really exciting, like you get to pick and choose what and when you are going to complete. Could you just say a bit more about the synchronous yet hybrid qualities of the onboarding so that we can perhaps take away some tools or some thoughts that we can ponder?
Absolutely. This has been sort of the surprise success, I think, of the program has been this synchronous but hybrid design. So I'm going to talk about data onboarding in particular. So in week 3, if you're in the data team, you spend a full week shipping a data pipeline, as I mentioned. So you design a data model, you implement a data pipeline, and then you actually build a dashboard using the data that you've loaded to our data warehouse. So that's a very complex and challenging process. And the experience that we built to teach folks how to do that perfectly meets sort of the synchronous but hybrid design. So I'll describe what that looks like. So at the beginning of the day, we have a group of learners, maybe 5, 6, 7 folks who have joined data. We get them on a call in the morning for 30 minutes. We explain sort of the challenge for the day. So maybe the challenge is you're going to design a data model. Then we give them their structured activity that they're going to follow to do that. We release them from the call. They go off and they work on this challenge, but they're in a Slack channel together, and they're also in something called a virtual pod. A virtual pod is a Google Hangout that stays open on a second monitor. You can mute yourself or even turn off your video, no problem. But folks can always unmute and sort of simulate turning to your neighbor at the office and just saying, hey, I'm stuck on step 5. Like, how do we create this aspect of the data model? And then folks can discuss and support each other. We also have sort of drop-in subject matter experts who will be available at certain points in the day when we know that folks are working on something a little bit challenging, or we know that folks might have questions about how things work. At the end of the day, we get back together on a video call and sort of debrief and say, how did things go? And we send the deliverables to their lead to give feedback. Day 2 starts all over again with a new aspect of the problem. So that's an example of the sort of hybrid approach where folks are probably only on a video call for maybe grand total like an hour out of the day, but they have the sense of, and they are working a problem together with a group at the same time so that they can leverage support when they need it, so that they can, turn to their neighbor for help. And I think that design has really been impactful, and it's exciting to see the results from it.
Thank you. That sounds fun. This is like not that big of a question, but this has been something that really keeps coming back to me. Do you encourage people to turn on their video? Do you require it from people? Do you highlight the benefits of connecting face to face, even virtually? Or do you just say, you do whatever?
It's an interesting question. At Shopify, the culture seems very much to be that people have their video and audio on. I do think the importance of seeing someone, like even now, our podcast listeners won't know this, but even now I'm looking at you and I'm seeing you smile, and that connection is so human and it's so important. And so we absolutely don't require anybody to have their camera on. There are many reasons why someone might need to, on a particular day, have their camera off for a little bit. But what we found is that typically everyone has their cameras on, and that is really enriching to the experience.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for that. I know it was just out of the blue, but it really triggered my curiosity when you were talking about how people work together, but they also work on their own, which is, I guess it's like an amazing opportunity that we would have never had we not had the pandemic, which is weird. I didn't mean it like that. But yeah, sure.
No, but I think you're right. I mean, as we iterate more and more on the fully remote onboarding design, I'm increasingly convinced that actually it's a better way to do onboarding. I mean, I'm shocked to hear myself say that, but I really believe that it is. Again, it's a forcing function for great educational design, first and foremost. And the accessibility of the experience is so high. Like to have folks learning for a whole month together from wherever they are in the world. I mean, that wouldn't have been possible before. And so it's very exciting to see some of the positives now of the remote digital by design experience and see what it could, the potential of that model. So I would encourage folks to lean into how great it can be to do training remotely, because I think that a lot of folks are afraid to kind of get into it at the beginning.
Right. Because we all as humans don't like change very much. And so we are all kind of a little hoping that this will be over soon. One other question that just popped to my head, because you said maybe remote is a better onboarding experience than offline. And excuse me if I should know this, I haven't been following Shopify all that closely, but do you all plan on just staying mostly remote when the pandemic is over, or have you figured out an action plan for when we can move back to our offices?
Yeah, so Shopify is digital by design now, and that is a permanent shift to a different way of working. It doesn't mean that nobody will work from offices, but it does mean that a majority of folks will probably continue to work from home after the pandemic ends. However, one of the things we're really excited about is that we will have still some sort of hub offices, but those offices won't be a primary workspace. They'll be used for things like maybe getting together for a celebration at the end of onboarding. Those are the types of things we're planning for and excited about in the future. So we can still leverage a lot of the benefits of remote education while also sort of leveraging these in-person spaces for what in-person is really good at. So that's sort of the future we're planning for.
Awesome. Thank you. We have touched on a great many things about onboarding and being remote and just technical onboarding in general, even the role of the manager and the role of your team. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
Well, I would love to say, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to come here and talk about this. You can probably tell that I nerd out over online education. So I would say to any of your listeners, please connect with me on Twitter. Feel free to send me an email. I really am happy to meet and discuss and help you brainstorm or problem solve any remote education problems that you might be grappling with, because I think this is a unique time for educators where we're all kind of trying to solve some of the same problems at the same time. And I would just love to be a part of that. So please reach out if you're interested in solving some of these problems as well.
Awesomeness. Thank you. That was going to be my last question, but you answered it. So, dearest listeners, Jerie Shaw is available at JERIE_SHAW, if I said that correctly. I'm
Correct.
getting a nod. On Twitter, she has shared some great insights about technical remote global onboarding, which I'm sure we can all take some things away from. So with that said, thank you for being our guest today. Today, my guest was Jerie Shaw, the Senior R&D Education Program Developer at Shopify. Make sure to follow her work on Twitter. With that said, if you're already on Twitter, follow Level Up Engineering as well, and let us know if this was your favorite episode so far. I am Karolina Tóth, and I hope to see you next time.
Thanks for staying with Level Up Engineering. If you enjoyed this podcast, so will your friends. Share this episode on your favorite social networking platform. To stay up to date with our content, follow Level Up Engineering on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or Google Podcast. Brought to you by Coding Sans, a software development agency building web applications with Angular and Node.js. Check them out at codingsans.com.